Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. It takes seeing the truth about the mind to be able to shift away from it. And it takes a willingness to make that shift. And it takes trust that there's another way to live other than the way the voice in your head would have you live. Ah, trust. There's that word again. Trust can't coexist with fear because it is the opposite of fear. Trust coexists with love. So trusting that there is another way to live takes a leap of faith. You have to leap from one state of consciousness, from the egoic state, to another. Leap is a really good word, because it's as if there is a chasm between these two states of consciousness. Trust allows you to take that leap. And yet trust belongs to the state of consciousness you're leaping toward, not the one you're in. What a dilemma. Still, people do this. They take the leap all the time. Why? How? Suffering pushes them over the cliff. Suffering caused by the egoic state of consciousness gets them to jump. It's a suicide jump in a sense, and what dies or is willing to die is the imaginary self, the false self. It's what you lose when you take this leap toward trusting life and away from fear. When the imaginary self and the imaginary life has become unbearable, when the stories about yourself and your life are unbearably painful, people are often willing to jump. Another word for this is surrender. You cry uncle, meaning you've had enough. You are at the end of your rope, out of bullets, ready to throw in the towel. There are lots of metaphors for this. And finally ready to admit that you, your egoic mind, doesn't actually know what to do, or how to be, or how to live. When the egoic state of consciousness has caused so much suffering, you see clearly that something is amiss. Something is not right. Your mind's beliefs, plans, and strategies haven't worked for you, and you begin to look for answers elsewhere. In this great humbling and place of not knowing, you're ready to look for answers outside the usual answers, the egos. You're ready to look to those who are not suffering, those who've found happiness, who are at peace, who love life, and that's the right place to look. If you want something, you have to look in places where it exists. The egoic mind knows nothing about happiness, although it pretends to. But this is what you've discovered, and what a great discovery this is, a monumental, life-altering discovery. The first step in discovering the truth is realizing that you don't have it. The second step is finding out who does. Fortunately, there are answers. You aren't doomed to being who the ego says you are, or living as the ego says you should live. Fortunately, there is another way. At first you have to trust that there is, and then you discover for yourself that there is. Once you have some experience of living in this other way, you've crossed a crucial barrier, the distrust of the mind. You've crossed the chasm to the other side. The second myth is that without fear you wouldn't accomplish anything. You'd be lazy. The belief is that fear gets you up in the morning. Fear gets you to be responsible and to work hard. Fear gets the job done and brings home the bacon. Of course, the many people whose survival needs are already taken care of blow this myth apart, or perhaps you've discovered this yourself. Even if you don't have to get up, be responsible, and work hard, you still do these things. What is it besides the ego that is willing to do these things? It isn't actually out of fear that you or anyone else does these things. It may seem like this, especially if you're living someone else's life and not the life you want to live. Then maybe you do get up and perform work you hate out of fear of not being able to pay the bills. So then it does seem that this myth is true. However, if you were doing work you love and living the life you were meant to live, you would see that you do these things out of joy and love, not fear. The ego's world is a self-fulfilling prophecy. This means that if you believe what it says, if you believe that you need fear to drive you in life, you'll be willing to settle for a life driven by fear instead of joy and love. Your beliefs are very important. On the other hand, if you believe that following your joy is how you're meant to live and how you discover the life you're meant to live, then you'll do that and discover that following your joy works. But you won't discover this unless you believe this. This is not something the voice in your head will tell you, however. Its voice is a voice of fear. You better not do what you really want to do. You better do what other people say. You better take that job that pays the most, even if you don't like doing that. Or else. Or else is the threat. How the egoic mind convinces you to not follow your joy. Why is the egoic mind so opposed to joy? It is always seeking happiness, so why doesn't it encourage you to follow your joy? The answer is simple, really. Joy is a fundamental experience of your true self, and joy is not in the ego's experience. Happiness is something the ego seeks, but it never finds it for long. Fear is the ego's fundamental experience. That's what it knows. It only knows how to guide you with fear. It doesn't know joy or love or peace. Have you noticed how the thoughts that run through your mind don't generally result in joy or love or peace, but the opposite? The world that the voice in your head creates is a world of stress, worry, fear, and never good enough, which is the opposite of peace. How could you ever find what you really want, love, peace, and happiness, by following the voice in your head? The only way to find these is by following something that knows these, something that is these, by following your true self. The true self is not the instinctive self, which is the ego, but the intuitive self. Instincts are very different from intuition, but you can see how these might be confused. Both arise within you, one from the unconscious mind, the imprinting, the conditioning, and one from a deeper, undefinable place that is often called the heart. The heart is a great mystery. It is the center point of your soul within the human body-mind. It is the contact point, the command center of the soul. It is the means by which the soul, or your connection with all that is, communicates with the human character you're playing in this lifetime. The heart is the wise master, and it knows exactly what's needed for your evolution and the evolution of the whole. When you follow it, you'll be happy and at peace, and love will naturally flow from you. When you don't, you'll feel ill at ease, confused, and lost, because you are. Losing yourself to your egoic mind is like being lost with a bad compass. It's time for you to find yourself more fully. Each of you does know your way and has been following it to some extent, but likely could follow it more. So here you are. You've come to the right place. There are answers here. And now for the third myth about fear. It helps you to be careful. Fear keeps you safe in the moment by cautioning you to be careful. This is the myth that is most difficult to see through. When the voice in your head says, "Look out, be careful, go more slowly," or something similar, it seems like a helpful friend, a companion. What could be wrong with that? The problem is that, even then, you're giving the voice in your head your attention when you don't need to, and that's all you're giving your attention to. You don't even need the voice of caution or warning. Here's why. That voice is simply repeating what you've already learned from experience. It's taking credit for your own innate wisdom. When that voice arises, you're already instinctively being careful and cautious. The voice of caution comes after the fact. It mimics your own inner wisdom. There are many occasions when the voice in your head speaks the obvious or tells you what you're already doing or what you already know. It repeats what you've learned from past experiences and what's already conditioned within you that's been useful in the past. Some of your conditioning is just this, what you've learned from experience, from the school of hard knocks. Among other things, you're remembering your mother's voice of caution, one you often heard as a child. Look both ways before crossing the street. Don't forget your school books. Don't be late. Haste makes waste. A stitch in time saves 9. Without your conditioning being put into words by the voice in your head, as an adult you would still naturally do these things. It's not the words in your head that cause you to behave wisely, but your conditioning, what you've already learned. If you look closely at your experience, you'll see that what I'm saying about the voice in your head is true, and that will help you free yourself from it. There are certain key thoughts, usually related to fear and safety, that keep you tied to the voice in your head. Once you see that even these thoughts aren't necessary, you're well on your way to spiritual mastery and freedom. You have to be willing to do some inquiry on your own into your own thoughts. Find out which ones have the most charge, are the stickiest, and make it most difficult for you to just be and relax into life just as it is. What keeps you from peace, from enjoying life? Only thoughts can do this. Which ones keep you going back to thinking unnecessarily and cause you stress and suffering? Know that every one of those thoughts is simply a ploy on the part of the ego, the antiquated programming, to keep you functioning on a more primitive level, rather than moving to the next stage in human evolution, a stage of greater rationality, freedom, peace, and happiness. Thank you for being here. I am with you always.